Hello, my name is Nathan Gould, and in today's video we're going to look at how we can connect finance and operations to Lasernet. So we're going to look at a few things in the video. First of all, how does the connection actually work? How do we configure our different Azure resources? And then finally, how do we test the connection to make sure that it's working as we want it to? I want to talk very briefly about how the connection works and where we need to go to get all of the component parts. So what we need to do in order to get finance and operations to talk to Lasernet is use two very simple tools. One is an Azure Service Bus queue and the other is Azure Storage. So the Service Bus queue is allowing us to send messages backwards and forwards, and the storage is our archive and we use it as working storage for the messaging system. So if we look at this very simple diagram here, we can see on the right hand side we have our Lasernet solution and on the left hand side we have Dynamics. So what happens is when we run a report in Dynamics, the Lasernet connector picks up on that and it transforms the data from Dynamics into a format that the Lasernet core solution can use. So then it sends that message to the Azure Service Bus. The Lasernet core solution is constantly polling that Azure Service Bus to see if there's anything new. When it sees that message, it pulls it into Lasernet. Then it transforms it into our document output, and then based on our destination settings, it sends it wherever we want. In this instance, we're sending it back down the Azure Service Bus into Dynamics so that we can preview it on the screen. And we're also sending a copy to Azure Storage so we can have it there as archive for future reference. So they're the two key tools that we're using to allow the connector and Dynamics to talk to the Lasernet core product. So there's two places that we'd need to go to configure those things. First is in finance and operations to define where we're sending stuff to. So where our Azure storage is and where our connection to the Azure Service Bus is. And the second is in Lasernet itself to tell it where to go and look for things. So again, what Azure storage to look into and what Azure Service Bus to look into. So what the Service Bus is it's a way of sending messages backwards and forwards between Lasernet and finance and operations. That's all it does, is it manages the movement of the data between the two systems. But we need to configure this. So the first place that we need to go to configure it is in Azure to actually create our Service Bus and our queue and our connection string. The second place we need to go is into finance and operations to tell finance and operations what connection to use when it's trying to talk to the server. Then the third place we need to go is into Lasernet to tell Lasernet what connection to look at for messages coming from finance and operations. So let's start by going into Azure and configuring our Service Bus, our queue, and our connection string. So here we are in portal.azure.com. Now your Azure configuration may vary slightly, but the way we recommend that you do this is you have all of your Lasernet resources in one resource group. The resource group that I'm using for this is our Delivery Training 2 one. So I'm going to click on that resource group. Then I'm going to click on Create to generate a new resource. Then we're going to search for Service Bus and click on this one. Click on Create. And we can see that our subscription and our resource group have been defaulted from where we created the resource from. So I'm going to leave that as it is. My namespace name is what I want to call the resource. So this is going to be Video Test Service Bus. The location is just the location which is closest to where I am. And then for the pricing tier, Basic is fine for this. Then we go to Review and Create. And then we click on Create. Then we just wait for a minute while this deployment completes. So now that this is deployed, we can click on Go to Resource. And this is our Service Bus. So there's two things we need to do in here. First is under Entities, we need to go to Queues. And we're going to create a new queue, which is called Lasernet. We can leave everything else as standard and just click on Create. The next thing we need to do is go to Shared Access Policies. Under this Root Manage Shared Access key, we need to make sure that all three of these are ticked on, and then we're going to copy our primary connection string. And we're just going to copy that to a Word document or to Notepad somewhere, because we'll need it again in a minute. And that's all of our configuration in Azure done. We've created our Azure service bus, we've created the queue, and we've got our connection string. So the next thing we need to do is go into Finance and Operations. And we're going to go to the list of modules, go to the Lasernet module, and we're going to go to Connections. And in this module, we've already got an Azure service bus and some Azure storage configured. And you may find that you have this if you've got the default configuration installed, in which case we can just update the information in here. But it could also be that you have nothing. So we'll create a new one so that you can see how that works. We're just going to click on New. We're going to select our connection type as Azure Service Bus Queue. And I'm going to call it Video Test ASB. Then this is where I'm going to paste in my connection string. Then I'm going to click on my queue name and select the one that we created there. Now, if I click on Validate, I can see validation has succeeded. So I know that the Finance and Operations connector can talk to my service bus. So that's great. We're going to click on Save, and then we're going to go back into the list of modules, and we're going to go to Lasernet servers. Because we've created our new connection, but we haven't told Finance and Operations what to do with it. So for the service bus queue, what we need to do is come into our Lasernet server, and under Outgoing Connection, we're going to select the one we've just created, which is our Video Test ASB. So now we're telling Finance and Operations to use this service bus to send its messages along. And then we need to define the other end of the solution. We need to go into Lasernet and tell it where to look for the messages. So I've got my Lasernet instance installed on this remote desktop. So on the remote desktop, under Tools, we're going to go to Modules, and we're going to find the input module for the Azure Service Bus. Double click on this. And this is again where we can copy our connection string. And we can see that our entity path down here, if we click on the drop down, this is our Lasernet queue that we configured before. Then if we click on Test Connection, connection is succeeded. Click OK, click OK again. And then in order for this to take effect in Lasernet, we need to go to Commit, leave a message, click OK, and then deploy. So now we've gone into Azure and we've created our new service bus. We've gone into Finance and Operations and we've created our connection. And we've referenced that connection on our server. And then in Lasernet itself, we've gone in and we've defined where it should go and look at that connection to get the message. So that is all the configuration we need to do for the Azure Service Bus to get Lasernet to talk to Finance and Operations. So all that we're using the storage for is to save copies of our files. So that could be for archiving, that could be the working storage for our connection, or it could be for our document handling functionality. But really it's just somewhere to save things. We've got two options when it comes to setting up our Azure storage. The first is the easiest and quickest way, which is using the out-of-the-box storage that comes with Finance and Operations. And the big pro for that is how quick and easy it is to set up, the fact that it works with all of our different configuration, and it is free. The minor con is that it can be fiddly sometimes when we're migrating data between different environments, because your storage accounts will change every time you copy the configuration to a new environment. We don't tend to find this is a problem in production environments, but if you have lots of pre-production or UAT or test environments, it can get a bit fiddly. So we have the option to use a custom storage resource in case that's the way your configuration is set up. And the pro of this is that you're totally in control of everything. You can define where the connection is looking at, and you can also see within the Azure storage container as well. So it's endlessly customizable. But the con is that it's just something else to set up and manage. There's a very small cost associated with it, and it also doesn't work with the document handling functionality within Finance and Operations. So we've got these two different options. How do we set them up? Well, for both of them, what we need is a connection string and some sort of instance/container. So if we're doing that with the finance and operations based storage, it's really simple. We just copy it from within the system. If we're doing it with a new storage account, then we need to create that in Azure in a very similar process to how we did with the Azure Service Bus queue in the previous video. So once that's all been configured, we need to do again a similar thing to what we did with the service bus. In finance and operations, we create a connection and then we define that it uses that connection in the Lasernet server. So whatever way we've created our storage, we take the connection string, we create it in finance and operations, and we define that that's what it uses. Then we go into our Lasernet instance and we do the same thing. We create the connection to the storage and we tell it when to use it. So we're closing that loop again. So we're in finance and operations now, and we need to get our connection string for our storage. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go to our list of modules. We're going to go into the Lasernet module, and then on the setup, we're going to find parameters, go to performance, and copy our connection string to the clipboard. Now, the next step depends on what version of the LAC you have installed. So if you have Lasernet connector 618 or newer, that's actually everything we need to do in finance and operations. If you have an older version, we need to set up a connection and reference it on the server. So this is a newer version. So if I just show you how this works, if we go to the Lasernet servers now, and we can see we've got our Azure Service Bus, but for our storage, we've defined nothing. So we're just going to click on Validate here, and this will validate because Lasernet knows to use the storage which comes with finance and operation. Now, if we have an older version, we just need to tell it to do that. So the way we do that is by going to the list of modules, to connections, and then we've got a connection here for storage. And under this connection, it has a connection type of storage, and then the type of that storage is Dynamics 365 Azure Storage. And we've just selected an instance from the list of instances here. So this is just our way of telling the older versions to use the native storage. If you, for some reason, wanted to use different storage, so some Azure storage which was hosted somewhere else, then all you would need to change is you would need to select, rather than this Dynamics 365 Azure storage here, and then copy in the connection string from the Azure storage container which you've created elsewhere. That's the two different options we've got there. So for the older version, where we've got our Azure storage, all we need to do is go to the Lasernet server and define that here. And then if we click validate, you'll see this also validates because we're just telling Lasernet to use the storage which comes with Dynamics. Now, these other three here, this is for document handling, and these are for our working storage for the Lasernet connector. We can leave these blank as long as our command within the commands in the Lasernet developer is called Azure Storage, capital A, capital S with a space. So let's go and have a look at that now. So in Lasernet, I'm going to go to commands, and I can see here that under connections, my storage connection is called Azure Storage, capital A, capital S with a space. So this is the default configuration. So this is what the Lasernet connector is looking for. If that's what it's set as, we don't need to change anything. If I'd called this Azure Storage-UAT or Azure Storage-Production, I would have to copy that exact text into these two boxes here. But mine has got the easiest name, so I'm going to leave it as it is. Double click on it to open it up. And I'm going to paste in the connection string that I copied from finance and operations under the parameters. Click on test connection. We can see it's been validated. Click on OK. Click on OK. Commit and deploy my changes. And then now those changes will have taken effect. So what we've done there is we've told finance and operations what storage to use to send the XML file to while it's working on it, while it's generated it. And then we've come into Lasernet and we've told Lasernet where to look for that file once the connector is finished with it. So we've closed the loop for our Azure storage there. So we've now set everything up in our Lasernet solution here. We've got our Azure storage, we've got our Azure service bus connections, and we've got all of our relevant connection strings set up in the different parts of the solution. So everything should be configured to work. But how do we check that? Well, we're going to use this solution to generate XMLs from finance and operations and send those XMLs to Lasernet. So the best way to test it is to actually just do that. So we're going to create a very simple query and run it from finance and operations and check that it turns up in Lasernet where we expect it to turn up. So that's the first thing we're going to do, just to validate that the connection is working. And the next thing we're going to do is just have a look inside a tool called the Lasernet Monitor, which allows us to see what Lasernet has been doing with the message from finance and operations. So let's start by going into finance and operations, and we're going to go to our Lasernet module and under common to reports. I'm just going to create a new report here. So I'm going to go new. Origin is going to stay as query. Report name is going to be test connection. I'm going to click on active to yes, and then I'm going to click on save. There's nothing else that we really need to do here, but I like to set my archive to default and my destinations to all and save XML to yes. So the next thing we're going to do is go under setup and query wizard. Click on next again. And I'm just going to go for HCM worker. Send that over. And then next. And for fields, I'm just going to select name. Now all I'm doing here is I'm selecting a table which has some data in it. So I know that there are some workers in this system because it's got the Contoso data set in it. So I can just run this and get a list of workers. If you don't have any data in your system, you can do things like run it for the list of legal entities, run it for the list of users, any table that you can find that's got some data in it. It doesn't really matter for this report as long as we can generate an XML. So that's all I'm going to worry about here. I'm going to click on finish. And once this is finished, I'm just going to click on underneath the query wizard, run report. Click on OK. And then wait for this to run. Now what we're expecting here is this. Report is not recognized. The report name is test connection. So we know the report is not recognized because we haven't actually set up any form outputs for this on the Lasernet developer yet. But what it has done is it's picked up the right report name. So let's go into our Lasernet instance here and go to our list of forms. And this blank form is the last one in the list. If it doesn't match any of these others, it will match this. So this is where we're expecting our test message to have gone. So if I double click on this, and then in here, I'm going to go to form and select last grab file from server, which is basically saying, get me a copy of the last time this ran. And here we can see this is what we got on our screen. The report name is test connection. And we can also see it was run by me. So that's a perfect indication that our connection is all set up and running as we want it to. What we wanted that connection to do was to send the XML file from finance and operations to Lasernet and then send the report back to finance and operations. So, and we can see here, here's our XML file that we've got from finance and operations. And also here's our report file, which is sent back to finance and operations. So job done, connection is running. So now we know that our connection is working, but there's another tool that we can use which will show us exactly how it is working. And that's called the Lasernet Monitor. So if we go onto our server where the developer is installed, we have this tool called the Lasernet Monitor. You can find this in the Start menu, in the Lasernet Developer folder, Lasernet Monitor. And you just log into it using your normal credentials. So if we open the Lasernet Monitor and we click on Fetch Newest, this shows us the process that the Lasernet connector went through the last time it was run. So this is the last report that we ran, and we can see some useful things in here. We can see, for example, exactly where it's stored, the document in the archive, and we can see which destinations were selected and whether it matches certain criteria. and we can search for things as well. So if we want to know exactly what form it matched, we might have a number of different forms that look similar. We can search for recognized and see that this recognized our blank form, which is the one we were expecting. So this tool is really useful to scroll through and see what Lasernet is doing with the message and see if anything's going wrong at any point. This is also useful because if there is an error, then it will be highlighted in red. So if you have an error with your connection or an error with something else, it will be highlighted as a red line. So the Lasernet monitor is a really useful tool to use to try and understand the way the message is being used between the two parts of the system.